The office smelled faintly of pine and cinnamon. Someone from HR had brought in a cheap artificial tree and decorated it with dollar store ornaments that clinked together every time the heater kicked in. The fluorescent lights buzzed above us, giving the whole scene a surreal glow, like cheer was being forced upon us whether we felt it or not. December had arrived, and so had the hollow promises of a holiday bonuses, employee appreciation, and all the fake cheer corporate America liked to shove in our faces once a year. But for me, that year felt different. It wasn't about the cheap office parties or the tacky sweaters we were told to wear on a holiday spirit Fridays. No, for me, it was about survival. I had bills stacking up like bricks against my chest. My daughter had been dropping hints about a bicycle she'd seen in the window of a toy store downtown. And my wife had been quietly clipping coupons, stretching every grocery bill until it screamed. This wasn't just another Christmas. It was supposed to be a turning point. After years of loyalty, endless overtime, and staying late to clean up projects no one else wanted to touch, I was sure I'd finally get that bonus Mr. Harrington had been dangling like a carrot all year. Mr. Harrington, my boss, my nightmare dressed in an overpriced Italian suit. The man believed himself to be some kind of god among men, walking the office halls with his polished shoes clicking like a judge's gavel. He wore arrogance like cologne, heavy and suffocating, and he wielded cruelty the way some men wield charm. If you stumbled in a meeting, he laughed louder than anyone. If you succeeded, he found a way to take the credit. He was the type of boss who thought fear equaled respect, and he never missed an opportunity to remind us we were all irreplaceable. That particular December morning, I noticed the way he smirked as he breezed through the cubicles, his designer scarf trailing behind him. He didn't see us as people. We were pawns, disposable and cheap. But that day, for some reason, he paused at my desk. His eyes lingered on the little photo frame I kept of my family, my wife, smiling despite everything, and my daughter holding a stuffed reindeer from last Christmas. Harrington's lips curved upward in something between a smirk and a sneer. Still got that old frame? Here? He said. You know, nostalgia doesn't pay the bills. He walked away before I could even muster a response. I told myself not to take it personally, but deep down, I felt the jab. That was Harrington's way, sharp little cuts that bled long after he walked out of the room. The office buzzed with rumors of the annual Christmas bonus. Some whispered it would be generous this year, maybe even double. Others, more cynical, claimed Harrington had blown through the budget on his private ski trip to Aspen. Me? I prayed for the former. I had already made promises to my daughter about gifts, to my wife about a small getaway, and to myself that after years of enduring this man's abuse, I'd finally reap some reward. When my phone rang and I saw Harrington's name flash across the screen, my heart jumped. He rarely called me directly unless it was urgent. Maybe, just maybe, this was it. The recognition, the nod, the acknowledgement that I had been more than just a cog in his machine. I straightened my tie, wiped the nervous sweat from my palms, and walked briskly toward his office. The door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open with a tentative smile. Harrington sat behind his massive oak desk, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Snow was just beginning to fall, tiny flakes dancing against the glass. For a fleeting second, the scene looked almost beautiful. Almost. Close the door, Harrington said, without looking up from the papers he was scribbling on. His tone was flat, dismissive. I obeyed, trying to hide the nervous energy swirling inside me. He finally looked up, his sharp blue eyes locking onto mine. There was no warmth there, no kindness. Just calculation. You've been with us for, what, 5 years now? He asked. 6, actually, I corrected softly. 6, he repeated, as if the number was meaningless. And in those 6 years, what have you really accomplished? The words hit me like a slap. I stammered. I've managed over a dozen major projects. I've trained new staff. He held up a hand, cutting me off. Yes, the usual drone work. But let's be honest, anyone could have done that. You're dependable. I'll give you that. But dependable isn't exceptional. My stomach twisted. Was this leading to a compliment or a critique? I couldn't tell. Then he leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. The company is downsizing. Costs need to be cut, and unfortunately, you're not exactly essential. I froze. The words didn't register at first. You're not essential. Harrington gave a dry chuckle. Don't take it personally. Business is business. Besides, it's not like you were ever going to climb the ladder anyway. Some people are born leaders. Others are born, followers. It felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. You're firing me? He shrugged, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Effective immediately. HR will handle the paperwork. Oh, and you'll have to return your badge today. Security will escort you out. The humiliation was instant. Searing. He didn't lower his voice. The glass walls of his office meant everyone could see me sitting there, pale and stunned, while he dismissed me like yesterday's trash. I could already feel eyes on me from the hallway. Mr. Harrington, please, I tried, desperation creeping into my voice. It's days before Christmas. My family, my daughter. He waved a hand, already bored. Spare me the sob story. I'm not Santa Claus. You'll land on your feet or not. Either way, it's no longer my concern. And with that, he returned to his papers, effectively erasing me from his world. I left his office in a daze, my vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall in front of him. Co-workers avoided my gaze, pretending to be busy, but I could feel their pity, or worse, their relief that it wasn't them. Security approached, polite but firm, and within minutes I was outside, the cold winter air biting into my skin. No box of belongings. No goodbye party, just me, standing alone on the sidewalk, jobless, humiliated, and empty-handed days before Christmas. I stared at the building, its glass windows reflecting the twinkling holiday lights strung up around the block. Inside, people would be laughing, sipping cider, and exchanging gifts at the office party Harrington had planned for himself. Meanwhile, I would have to go home and tell my little girl that Santa might not come this year. In that moment, something inside me cracked. It wasn't just sadness. It wasn't just fear. It was rage. Pure, unfiltered rage. And though I didn't know it yet, that was the night the seed of revenge was planted. The snow fell heavier that evening, blanketing the streets in white, but instead of feeling magical, it felt suffocating. Each flake was another reminder of how cold the world had just become. I trudged home, my mind numb, my heart pounding with dread. How could I walk into my house and explain this to my wife? How could I look into my daughter's wide, hopeful eyes and tell her that the Christmas she had been dreaming about was slipping through my fingers? When I opened the front door, the smell of gingerbread cookies greeted me. My wife had been baking, humming a Christmas tune under her breath. The lights from the small tree in the corner blinked cheerfully, the ornaments carefully placed by my daughter earlier that week. She came running, her pigtails bouncing, her cheeks rosy from excitement. Daddy! Did you get your bonus today? Can we go get the bike tomorrow? Her voice was filled with innocent hope, and it pierced me like a knife. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile I didn't feel. We'll talk about it later, sweetheart, I said, my voice trembling despite my best effort. That night, after my daughter went to bed, I told my wife the truth. She sat silently for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. She didn't yell. She didn't blame me. That almost made it worse. We'll figure it out, she whispered finally. We always do. But I could see the disappointment flicker across her face, the weight of crushed plans settling on her shoulders. The weekend getaway we had talked about, gone. The new winter coat she had been eyeing, impossible. The bike my daughter had circled in the toy catalogue, a cruel fantasy now. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Harrington's smug smile, heard his dismissive voice telling me I was not essential. His words gnawed at me, replaying in a loop, louder each time. Not essential, replaceable, a follower. The next morning, I forced myself to return to the office, not as an employee, but to collect the small box of my belongings HR had promised to mail, yet conveniently forgotten. As I entered, the place was buzzing with energy. The Christmas party was in full swing. Employees in cheap Santa hats clinked plastic cups of champagne. There were trays of catered food, twinkling lights strung along the cubicles, and in the center of it all, Harrington stood like a king in his castle. I lingered at the edge of the room, unseen by most, and watched. Harrington raised a glass, his booming voice carrying over the music. To another year of success. to cutting the fat and keeping only the strong. Laughter followed, sycophantic and hollow. My former co-workers clapped, some nervously, some genuinely. I noticed a few eyes darting toward me, their gazes quickly sliding away when I caught them. No one wanted to be associated with me now. The fired man, the example, the cautionary tale. I clenched my fists as Harrington handed out envelopes. Bonuses. Fat checks stuffed into crisp paper, handed out with a flourish as if he were Santa himself. My chest burned as I imagined the money that could have kept my family afloat, now going to those who still had their places in his twisted kingdom. And then I saw it. Harrington himself receiving a gift, not from anyone else, but from the company budget he controlled like his personal bank account. A brand new Rolex, gleaming under the office lights. He slid it onto his wrist, admiring it, his smile wide and cruel. Can't go skiing in Aspen without the right accessories, he joked, earning another round of forced laughter. Aspen, the ski trip, of course. He was planning to spend Christmas in luxury while I scrambled to pay for he. He had taken food from my daughter's plate to line his own pockets with extravagance. The injustice burned hotter. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every late night I stayed behind to fix his mistakes, every presentation I crafted only for him to slap his name on, every time I swallowed my pride while he belittled me in front of others. He had stolen my dignity, my security, and now he had stolen Christmas. The days that followed were dark. Bills piled up on the kitchen counter like mocking little reminders of my failure. Rent was due, utilities overdue, and yet Harrington's name kept popping up in the local news, not because of scandal, but because he was flaunting his wealth. Articles about a successful businessman taking their families on lavish holiday trips. Smiling photos of him shaking hands at charity events, pretending to care about the community he actually exploited. My wife tried to stay positive, but I caught her crying quietly one night while folding laundry. She thought I didn't notice. She thought I was asleep. That image seared itself into my brain. Her silent tears, the weight she carried because of one man's cruelty. The breaking point came when my daughter handed me a letter she had written to Santa. She had drawn little pictures of the bike she wanted, carefully coloring it red and blue. She asked Santa not only for the bike, but for Daddy to be happy again. That was it. That was the moment my despair turned into resolve. Harrington had taken everything from me, my job, my pride, my family's joy. But he wasn't untouchable, and knew things about the company, about him, that he never imagined could come back to bite him. He thought I was a follower. He thought I was weak, but he had no idea what desperation mixed with rage could create. So I began to plan. I started small. I went back through old emails, saved documents, and notes I had tucked away over the years. Harrington was careless, arrogant. He thought no one beneath him had the brains to notice his mistakes. But I had noticed. Every shady deal, every corner he cut, every cruel joke he let slip when he thought no one was listening. And I remembered something else. Months ago, Harrington had mocked me during a meeting, saying I was too sentimental for keeping backups of old files. He laughed when he saw the portable drive I always carried, calling it a Pariner. But that drive contained years' worth of data he had forgotten I had access to, data that painted him in a very dangerous light. As I pieced things together, the picture became clearer. Harrington had enemies. Competitors. Rivals who would pay handsomely for the right information. And I had nothing left to lose. Christmas was coming. Harrington thought he had won, thought he had humiliated me into silence. But what he didn't realize was that by firing me before Christmas, he had written his own downfall. Because this year, my gift to him would be unforgettable. The days following Alex's abrupt firing felt like being trapped inside a storm that never ended. Every morning, he woke up with the same bitter taste of betrayal lodged in his throat, the kind of bitterness that doesn't fade with coffee or distraction. The cruel smirk on Richard's face, the dismissive tone when he tossed Alex aside like trash. Those images replayed in his mind on a loop, sometimes jolting him awake at night. But in those dark hours, something began to stir inside him. The hopelessness that once crushed him was morphing into something sharper, harder, resolve. Alex had always been meticulous. He wasn't the kind of person who acted out of impulse. Even in the face of injustice, he'd prefer to think, to calculate, to weigh every angle before striking. And in this case, his strike had to be flawless. Richard wasn't just any boss. He was the type of man who thrived on control, who thought he had every situation rigged in his favor. If Alex was going to retaliate, he couldn't afford half measures. No, his revenge had to hit Richard where it hurt most: his reputation, his power, his sense of untouchable superiority. The first stage of Alex's plan began with information. Revenge, he believed, wasn't about brute force. It was about knowledge, leverage, and timing. Luckily, Alex knew the company like the back of his hand. He had worked there for almost a decade, climbing from an entry-level analyst to a senior strategist, and in those years, he had seen things: shady contracts, backroom deals, corners cut to maximize profits. He hadn't cared much at the time. After all, the company paid his bills. But now, those little fragments of memory became weapons. One evening, Alex sat at his small dining table, laptop open, papers scattered around him. His apartment was dimly lit, the hum of the old heater filling the silence. He started piecing things together like a detective on the trail of a criminal empire. He remembered a vendor deal from 2 years back where Richard had pressured him to overlook irregularities. He recalled a hush-hushy consulting fee that went to someone suspiciously connected to Richard's brother-in-law. Individually, these things seemed minor, almost irrelevant. But Alex knew better. Corruption was never about one big crime. It was about a pattern, a web of small, interconnected wrongdoings that could unravel an empire once the right thread was pulled. But gathering dirt wasn't enough. Richard was too slick, too careful. If Alex went public with unsubstantiated claims, he'd be dismissed as a bitter ex-employee. No, he needed proof. Undeniable, inescapable evidence. And that's where the second stage of his plan emerged: infiltration. Alex still had access to certain files. Richard, in his arrogance, had fired him without ensuring all of his accounts were fully deactivated. Maybe he assumed Alex wouldn't dare meddle, or maybe he simply underestimated him. Either way, Alex saw his opening. Late at night, he logged into the company's internal system. A familiar dashboard lit up on his screen, a reminder of the life he had been unfairly ripped away from. He navigated cautiously, downloading copies of emails, contracts, and transaction records that hinted at irregularities. Every click felt like a gamble, his heart racing as if Richard himself might appear behind him at any moment. But the thrill of it also fueled him. He was taking back control, one file at a time. Weeks passed as Alex built his arsenal. He saved everything in an encrypted drive, carefully organizing documents into categories: illegal deals, nepotism, client lies. The deeper he dug, the more he uncovered. Richard wasn't just a cruel boss. He was rotten to the core. There were invoices doctored to inflate costs, hidden kickbacks, and emails where Richard explicitly instructed staff to mislead clients about project timelines. Alex could hardly believe how blatant it all was. Richard thought he was invincible, that no one would ever dare to challenge him. But Alex wasn't going to stop at exposing Richard internally. He wanted humiliation. He wanted Richard to feel powerless, the way he had felt sitting in that office being told he was worthless. That meant taking the evidence outside the walls of the company. But how? Who would listen? That question haunted Alex until one night, while scrolling through his phone, he stumbled across an article in a local business journal. It was about a CEO of a different tech firm who had been exposed for fraud, brought down not by regulators but by an anonymous whistleblower who leaked documents to a rival company. That's when it clicked. Richard's biggest rival was Titan Corp, a competitor Richard had always mocked publicly, claiming they were a second-rate amateurs. Alex could almost hear Richard's booming laughter whenever Titan Corp came up in meetings. What if, Alex thought, Titan Corp suddenly had the ammunition to crush him? What if the rival company Richard hated most was the one to deliver his downfall? It was poetic justice. The plan crystallized. Alex would compile the most damning evidence, package it neatly, and deliver it straight into the hands of Titan Corp's leadership. They wouldn't hesitate to use it. They stood to gain too much. Richard wouldn't just face scrutiny. He'd face humiliation at the hands of his sworn enemies. But there was a risk. Titan Corp might decide to bury the evidence if they could exploit it secretly. Or worse, they could tip Richard off, creating blowback for Alex. To minimize the risk, Alex decided to make it impossible to ignore. He wouldn't just send it to Titan Corp. He would also prepare anonymous leaks to the press, ensuring that once the information was out, it would spread like wildfire. The third stage of the plan required patience. He couldn't act too quickly. Richard was preparing for the annual Christmas Gala, a grand event where he flaunted his wealth, power, and dominance. Business leaders, politicians, and investors all attended. Richard thrived on the spotlight, presenting himself as the golden boy of the industry. If Alex timed his strike to coincide with that gala, the impact would be catastrophic. Imagine Richard smiling for the cameras, basking in his glory, only to have everything ripped from him the very same night. That, Alex thought, would be the ultimate gift. In preparation, Alex sharpened his approach further. He created burner emails, encrypted his communications, and practiced anonymity like a second skin. He even reached out discreetly to a contact in journalism, an old college acquaintance now working as an investigative reporter. Without revealing himself, he hinted at a massive story about corporate corruption and asked if they'd be willing to follow up if documents suddenly surfaced. The response came quickly. Always. That one word was enough to reassure Alex. He wasn't alone in this. As Christmas crept closer, Alex could feel the tension inside him building. His plan wasn't just revenge anymore. It had become a mission to right a wrong, to expose a man who thrived on crushing others, to prove that people like Richard couldn't walk over the lives of good, hard-working individuals without consequences. He felt sharper, more alive than he had in years. For once, he wasn't powerless. He was in control, but as much as he tried to focus on the mechanics of his plan, he couldn't ignore the flicker of fear deep inside him. What if Richard found out? What if the plan backfired and Alex ended up branded as a criminal instead of a hero? The doubts clawed at him, but he shoved them aside. He had already lost everything. His job, his dignity, his peace of mind. There was nothing left for Richard to take from him. That thought gave him courage. On Christmas Eve, Alex sat in his apartment, surrounded by neatly stacked folders and USB drives. His laptop screen glowed faintly in the dark, showing the final compressed file he had labeled "the gift." Inside it was everything: emails, contracts, invoices, a roadmap of corruption that pointed straight at Richard. Alex stared at the screen for a long moment, his finger hovering over the send button of a draft email addressed to Titan Corp's CEO. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself. The plan was ready. The trap was set. Tomorrow, at Richard's most triumphant moment, the fall would begin. And Alex? He would finally get to unwrap his own version of justice. The weeks leading up to Christmas carried a certain chill in the air, not just the winter frost biting at my fingers each morning, but a coldness that seemed to settle into my bones every time I thought about Mr. Harkins. My boss. The man who had stripped me of my livelihood just before the holidays, laughed at my dedication, and mocked the loyalty I had shown him for years. His cruelty was more than just an insult. It was personal. It felt as if he had written me off as insignificant, disposable, a background character in his story of power and profit. That stung. But little did he know, I wasn't done. Not even close. I had spent sleepless nights working on my plan, sharpening every detail, rehearsing every possible angle until it was airtight. Revenge wasn't just a fantasy anymore. It was alive, breathing, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And that moment was coming fast. The first stage of my execution was subtle. I knew Harkins well. His pride, His arrogance, his complete belief that he was untouchable. These were weaknesses, cracks in his armor. He thrived on control, on seeing others tremble under his decisions, on maintaining the illusion that he was always one step ahead. My goal wasn't just to ruin his holiday, it was to dismantle that illusion brick by brick, until the very foundation of his confidence collapsed under him. I started small. Anonymous emails. Mysterious phone calls. Just whispers at first, nothing obvious, nothing that could be traced back to me. I posed as a concerned client, hinting that I had heard things about the company's financial dealings. I dropped vague lines about inconsistencies in contracts, about hush-hush settlements that might catch the wrong person's attention if they weren't careful. Corporate people like Hawkins live in constant paranoia of audits, lawsuits, and scandals, and I fed into that paranoia like a slow drip of poison. And sure enough, the effects began to show. His usual smug demeanor in the office, the one that used to make everyone shrink when he walked by, started to crack. His voice on the phone grew sharper, impatient. His emails were sent at odd hours, riddled with typos, as if his hands were shaking while he typed. I knew I had struck the first nerve, but that was only the appetizer. The main course required precision. You see, Hawkins had always flaunted his Christmas traditions. He loved throwing lavish holiday parties, the kind that screamed wealth and superiority. Every December, he hosted the biggest corporate gathering of the year, inviting not just employees but also high-profile clients, investors, and competitors. It was his way of flexing power, of showing everyone that he was not just successful, but untouchably so. That party was his pride and joy, his ego on full display, which meant it was the perfect stage for me to make my move. I secured access to the venue weeks before the event. A friend of mine worked with the catering service contracted for the party, and a small bribe ensured that I could slip in unnoticed during preparations. While others saw a grand ballroom filled with decorations, lights, and champagne glasses, I saw opportunity. I studied the layout, memorized where every camera was, where the VIPs would be seated, where the microphone would be placed for Harkin's big annual speech. I knew he was going to use that moment, the height of the night, all eyes on him, to gloat about another successful year. That's when I'd flip the script. I created a presentation, not just any slideshow, but a carefully crafted exposé of Harkin's darkest secrets. His under-the-table deals, his backstabbing of loyal employees, the fraudulent numbers he had been feeding to investors. All of it backed with proof I had collected during my years at the company. Emails he thought he had deleted, receipts he thought no one had noticed, audio recordings he never imagined anyone say. I pieced them together into a spectacle so undeniable, so damning, that once revealed, it would leave him with no defense. But here's the beauty of it. I wasn't just going to humiliate him in front of his employees. No, I wanted the clients, the investors, the sharks circling his empire to see him bleed. Because humiliation alone wasn't enough. I wanted him financially ruined, reputation shredded, empire crumbling, all before Christmas morning. The night of the party finally arrived, and I could almost taste the tension in the air as I entered the venue disguised among the catering staff. Nobody looked twice at a man carrying trays of champagne or fiddling with the audio set. I kept my head down, played the role, all while my heart thundered with anticipation. The ballroom was stunning, golden chandeliers glittering above, Christmas wreaths and poinsettias lining the walls, the scent of roasted meats and mulled wine filling the space. Everyone was dressed in sparkling gowns and tailored suits, laughing, clinking glasses, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the polished surface. And then he walked in, Harkins. Smug as ever, draped in an expensive suit, shaking hands, flashing that fake smile that hit his rotting core. The sight of him made my blood boil, but I held it in. Patience. Tonight wasn't about anger, it was about precision. As the night went on, I moved closer to the stage. The projector was ready, the files were queued up. All I needed was the moment, and it came, right on schedule. Ladies and gentlemen, Harkins boomed into the microphone, his voice filled with pride. Another year of triumph for our company. and none of it would have been possible without your continued trust and support. The crowd applauded, glasses raised, his ego swelling like a balloon. He launched into his usual speech about growth, resilience, leadership, the same empty words he recycled every year. But this year, I had a new script for him. With one discreet press of a button, the lights dimmed, and the projector screen flickered to life. At first, people thought it was part of his planned presentation. Graphs of profits, photos of smiling employees. But then the first email appeared on screen. Hykin's voice caught in his throat. "Wait, what is this?" he muttered into the mic, his confident facade cracking. Gasps rippled through the room as the email scrolled across the giant screen, exposing his backroom deals, his callous words about his staff, his outright fraud. Every slide was a dagger, and with each one, the audience shifted from polite smiles to shocked whispers to open outrage. Clients stared at him with disgust. Investors exchanged furious glances. Employees who had once feared him now smirked, their eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of seeing the tyrant brought low. No, this is fake. Someone hacked this." Hykin stammered, sweat pouring down his face, his voice trembling. But the more he denied, the worse it became, because every piece of evidence was undeniable. Dates, signatures, voice recordings that played across the speakers. His empire wasn't just cracking, it was imploding in real time. And I was there, hidden among the crowd, watching as the man who had mocked me, who had thrown me aside like garbage, crumbled before everyone he had ever tried to impress. The chaos that followed was glorious. Clients stormed out, vowing lawsuits. Investors shouted across the ballroom, demanding answers. Employees pulled out their phones, recording every second to share online. The humiliation was absolute. And the timing? Perfect. Just days before Christmas, his a holiday tradition he had transformed into the night his empire burned. I slipped out quietly as the scene unraveled behind me, the sound of his desperate denials echoing through the halls. Outside, the winter air bit at my skin, but for the first time in weeks, I felt warm inside. The execution was complete. His holiday was ruined, his legacy shattered, and the power he once lorded over everyone had been stripped away in front of his entire world. And this was only the beginning. The morning after Christmas, silence blanketed the office. No cheerful greetings, no echo of laughter bouncing down the corridors. Instead, an air of tension hung heavy as the employees whispered in hushed tones, their eyes darting nervously toward the closed door of Mr. Harrington's office. The boss who once strutted with arrogance and demanded the impossible from his staff was nowhere to be found. The king of the office had vanished, dethroned overnight. News traveled fast. By noon, it wasn't just the employees who knew. Clients, partners, and even competitors had caught wind of the scandal. Harrington, the man who had prided himself on perfection, had been caught in a storm of his own making. His reputation, once polished to gleaming perfection, was now shattered like fragile glass. I watched from a quiet corner, sipping my coffee, trying not to smile too obviously. This wasn't just revenge, it was a carefully orchestrated symphony of justice. For months, I had endured his belittlement, his arrogance, his attempts to crush me under his thumb. But in just one holiday season, he had been reduced to a cautionary tale whispered about in office kitchens and corporate boardrooms alike. The fallout was swift. First came the backlash from clients. One particularly powerful account, the kind that made or broke annual revenue targets, pulled out without warning, citing your lack of professional integrity in leadership. Then came the HR intervention, prompted by the very emails I had carefully leaked. The HR director wasn't stupid. She knew Harrington's firing spree, his intimidation tactics, and his borderline harassment had been brewing into something ugly. The only reason it hadn't blown up sooner was fear. But fear, once cracked, never regains its grip. By the end of the week, Harrington's position was under a review, which was corporate speak for inevitable termination. Rumors swirled that the board had been sitting on complaints about him for years, and now that someone had pulled the pin on the grenade, they were ready to wash their hands of him. The mighty boss, The tyrant who had fired me days before Christmas was now on the chopping block himself. And while he unraveled, my life slowly rebuilt itself. My colleagues, once too scared to speak, began reaching out to me quietly. Some sent messages of gratitude, thanking me for standing up in ways they hadn't dared. Others simply offered words of solidarity, sharing their own stories of humiliation under Harrington's reign. It was like watching chains being broken, one by one. But poetic justice wasn't complete until fate dealt its final blow. On New Year's Eve, as the city prepared to light up the sky with fireworks, I received a notification on my phone. It was a news alert from a local business paper. The headline was short, sharp, and almost surreal. A corporate firm cuts ties with controversial executive amid scandal. There it was. My boss, once untouchable, invincible, dripping with power, had been forced to resign in disgrace. No grand farewell party, no teary speeches about his contributions, just a cold, clinical statement from the company. We are committed to integrity, accountability, and respect. Mr. Harrington's actions did not align with these values. I read the article twice, my heart pounding with satisfaction. It wasn't just that he had lost his job. It was that he had lost it in the exact same way he had humiliated others, abruptly, with no regard for his dignity. He had been stripped of the very thing he held above all else, his power. I imagined him sitting alone in his lavish house, the same one he had bragged about endlessly, with no holiday cheer to comfort him. The decorations that once screamed wealth and status now probably looked like hollow ornaments mocking him. His family, who had once paraded around in his success, must have been whispering about the shame his downfall brought. And he, the man who fired me without a second thought before Christmas, had ended the year as nothing more than a cautionary tale. But the sweetest part of revenge wasn't watching him fall. It was the life I built in the aftermath. A week into the new year, I received a call from a rival company. They had heard about what happened, not the details, but enough to know that I wasn't just another employee. I was resilient, resourceful, and capable of handling myself in the worst of storms. They wanted me, better pay, better hours, and most importantly, respect. Walking into that new office on my first day felt like stepping into a different world. The people smiled genuinely, the managers treated their staff like human beings, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was bracing for battle. I felt free. As the months passed, Harrington's name faded into obscurity. Every now and then, I'd hear whispers about him trying to claw his way back into the industry, only to be quietly rejected. His arrogance had left too many scars, his reputation too tainted. The man who once thought he was irreplaceable was now utterly forgotten. And me? I thrived. My career blossomed, my confidence soared, and every time I cashed a paycheck that was double what he had once paid me, I smiled. Not because of the money, but because of what it symbolized. I had survived. I had won. Revenge wasn't just about ruining his holiday. It was about rewriting the story. About proving that no matter how much power someone holds, it can be taken away when they abuse it. About showing that justice, though delayed, always finds its way. So yes, my boss fired me before Christmas. But in the end, it was his holiday that was ruined, his career that was destroyed, and his legacy that was erased. And me? I celebrated the new year not with bitterness, but with freedom, success, and the quiet, burning satisfaction of knowing that karma had finally done its job. And if you love stories where betrayal turns into justice, and the underdog rises stronger than ever, make sure to subscribe now and join me for more tales of revenge, resilience, and poetic justice.